The morning sun cast long shadows across Murphy's auto shop, where the familiar sounds of wrenches clicking and engines humming filled the air. Sarah Murphy stood quietly by the coffee pot, watching through the office window, as her father's mechanics gathered around a sleek blue muscle car that had arrived the night before. At 25, Sarah had grown up in this shop. She knew every tool by name, every engine sound by heart. But her father, Frank Murphy, had always insisted she focus on the business side of things. "College education shouldn't go to waste," he would say, pointing to her accounting degree hanging on the wall. The shop's atmosphere changed when Mr. Harrison arrived. He was the kind of man who commanded attention without saying a word. His perfectly tailored navy suit stood out among the oil-stained coveralls, and his polished shoes clicked sharply against the concrete floor. Harrison owned the biggest construction company in town, and his business kept Murphy's auto shop running. "Frank," Harrison called out, his voice carrying across the shop. "I need to talk to you about that Chevelle." Sarah watched her father wipe his hands on a rag before approaching Harrison. The conversation was brief but intense. She could see the tension in her father's shoulders, the way he ran his hand through his graying hair. This was the look he got when a job was going wrong. The mechanics had been working on Harrison's 1970 Chevelle SS for 3 days. It was a beautiful car, but it had a problem that no one could solve. The engine would start perfectly, run smooth for exactly 10 minutes, then suddenly lose all power. They had checked everything twice. New spark plugs, clean fuel lines, perfect compression. Yet the problem persisted. Harrison's deadline was approaching fast. He needed the car for a classic car show where he planned to close a major business deal. Without the car running properly, the deal would fall through. And if Harrison wasn't happy, Murphy's auto shop could lose its biggest client. "We've tried everything, Mr. Harrison," Frank said, his voice heavy with frustration. "The engine looks perfect on paper, but something's not right." Harrison's eyes swept across the shop, taking in the worried faces of the mechanics. Then his gaze settled on Sarah, who was still standing by the office window. "What about her?" he asked, nodding in her direction. "Sarah. She's my daughter, but she handles the books, not the engines. I've heard she grew up in this shop. Maybe fresh eyes would help." Harrison paused, then added with a slight smile, "I'll tell you what, Frank. If your daughter can figure out what's wrong with this engine, I'll pay double the repair cost. If she can't, well, we'll discuss our future business relationship." The shop fell silent. Every mechanic stopped what they were doing. Frank looked uncomfortable, but he knew he didn't have much choice. "Sarah," he called out reluctantly, "would you mind taking a look?" Sarah felt every eye in the shop watching her as she walked toward the Chevelle. Her heart was beating fast, but she tried to appear calm. She had watched these men work for years, absorbed their knowledge like a sponge. But she had never been asked to solve a problem this important. She opened the hood and looked down at the engine. It was beautiful, with chrome parts gleaming and everything in perfect order. Too perfect, almost. She ran her fingers along the engine block, feeling for anything unusual. "Tell me exactly what happens," she said to Tommy, the lead mechanic. "Starts great, runs smooth, then at exactly 10 minutes, it's like someone turns off a switch, power just dies." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. She had heard this problem described 3 times over the past few days, but now she was really listening. Something about the timing bothered her. Exactly 10 minutes. That was too precise to be random. She leaned closer to the engine, studying, not just the parts, but how they were arranged. Her eyes moved slowly from the fuel system to the electrical components. Then she noticed something that made her pause. Near the back of the engine bay, partially hidden behind the air cleaner, she spotted a small electronic device that didn't belong. It was modern, sleek, and completely out of place in a 1970 engine compartment. "Has anyone checked this?" she asked, pointing to the device. The mechanics gathered around to look. "What is that?" Tommy asked, squinting at the unfamiliar component. Sarah carefully examined the device without touching it. It had tiny wires running to the ignition system and what looked like a small timer display. "Mr. Harrison," she said slowly, "this appears to be some kind of electronic timer connected to your ignition system." Harrison stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "A timer?" "Yes. It looks like it's programmed to interrupt the ignition after exactly 10 minutes of operation." Sarah stood up and faced Harrison directly. "This isn't a mechanical problem. Someone installed this device deliberately." The shop remained quiet as everyone processed what Sarah had discovered. Finally, Harrison began to smile. It started as a small grin, then grew into full laughter. "Outstanding," he said, clapping his hands slowly. "Absolutely outstanding." Frank looked confused. "Mr. Harrison, I don't understand." Harrison's smile was genuine now. "Frank, I had that timer installed myself. I wanted to test your shop's diagnostic abilities. I've been considering expanding my business relationship with you, but I needed to know if your team could handle complex problems." He turned to Sarah. "Young lady, you just passed a test that stumped 4 experienced mechanics. You looked beyond the obvious and found the real answer." Sarah felt a mix of relief and surprise. "So the car is actually fine?" "Perfectly fine. Once we remove that timer, it'll run like a dream." Harrison pulled out his checkbook. "I meant what I said about paying double. And Frank, I want to discuss giving Murphy's Auto Shop an exclusive contract for all my company's fleet maintenance." As Harrison wrote the check, he looked at Sarah again. "I hope your father realizes what an asset he has in you. Not everyone thinks to look for what doesn't belong." Frank put his arm around Sarah's shoulder, pride evident in his voice. "Maybe it's time we put that mechanical knowledge of yours to better use around here." The afternoon sun streamed through the shop windows as Sarah removed the timer device from the Chevelle's engine bay. The simple click of a disconnect restored the car to its full power. Sometimes the biggest problems had the simplest solutions, and sometimes it took someone willing to see things differently to find them. That evening, as Sarah cleaned up the tools, she smiled at the new title painted on her office door. Sarah, Murphy, Diagnostic Specialist. It felt right, like coming home to a place she had always belonged.